Hello, everyone. Welcome to the premiere episode of Real Talk on Racism. I'm Russ Terry.
And I'm Renai, Ellison, and I am so excited about this opportunity, this brand new project, to work with my good friend Russ Terry and to bring you some invaluable conversations about racism.
Yes, and it's a topic that we're both super passionate about.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to you that when I reached out to you about this idea, you said yes right away.
Immediately.
Yeah, which is awesome. And I know we're going to bring so many great discussions and inspiring content to all of our viewers. So thank you for watching. Mm-hmm. So Renai, I can probably assume things, but I don't want to assume. I want to ask, what are the reasons that this topic is something you're so passionate about?
I'm so glad that you asked that question. Right now, I'm working as the interim executive director for an organization called NJ CASA. It's the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And this topic of racism and the topic of sexual assault really align very perfectly with the work that I'm doing. Recently, we have altered our mission and our vision and our guiding principles to include the idea of really centering the voices of marginalized communities. Because there's so many isms, there's so many reasons that people are sexually assaulted, and a lot of that stems from racism, oppression, and the things that we're going to be talking about on the show.
So, sexual assault and racism are intertwined?
They are. You've probably heard the term intersectionality.
Yes, I just learned it last year. We're going to tell you what intersectionality is.
Yeah, so basically what that means is that you can't just look at survivors and think of sexual assault. You have to think of their path, their journey, everything that they've been through, whether they're a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, whether they are Black or brown people, whatever their trauma, whatever their experience, usually factors into the experience of sexual assault and how they survive and how they thrive as a result of that experience.
So intersectionality, tell me if this is right, is kind of the intersection of multiple, somebody checking multiple boxes.
Absolutely.
Like Black and gay, or,
transgender
and Asian.
Right, exactly. So the reason that I wanted to do this show is because I want to really be able with you to surface this whole idea of how racism and oppression really factor into survivorship.
Okay, well, I know you are presumably going to have some great guests who you know, and just so all of you know, sometimes Renai will be here hosting with a guest, sometimes I'll be here hosting with a guest, so I know you're going to talk a lot more about that in the coming episodes.
Absolutely.
We have lots of great episodes planned for everybody. How about on the personal side? Is it safe to assume that you have experienced racism against you personally or professionally in your life?
You know what's interesting, Russ? I always knew cognitively that racism existed. I was fortunate to grow up in a home where my mother really emphasized the idea that being Black, being a woman, was not something that was a negative thing. But I can honestly say that throughout my experience, I have experienced racism, but didn't really have the words to be able to describe what it was that I was going through. I wasn't able to say, that what I was experiencing was microaggressions, that people were saying things that marginalized me or made me feel oppressed. And I didn't have the words, I didn't have the language for it. And I've been very fortunate in this role to be able to learn so much about this topic. And, so your call was kind of serendipitous, as they say.
Oh, good, good. So microaggressions is something I talk about in the diversity trainings I do at companies. They're, for people that don't know, these very subtle things that may appear immaterial on the surface, but when in reality, collectively, they become much more material when a person of color or anyone, a woman in the workplace, LGBT, any race, etc., hears these microaggressions at work, in their personal life, etc. So what's an example of a microaggression somebody said to you?
Well, I can think of, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And I always say that in those three, that threefold approach, that the inclusion is really the most important part. So what happens when you're a Black woman and you're working in a corporate environment and you're the only one?
Yeah.
What happens? You get discluded. You're not included in the conversations. You're not made to be aware of certain things. You're what we always say, which is you're marginalized. You're put on the margins. You're not viewed as important or valuable to the conversation. Your voice is not centered in the conversation. Your ideas are not respected. I can just speak for myself that that's happened to me many times throughout my career.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
And the phrase "the only" that you said a second ago, there are so many people of color in the workplace or even in schools, etc., who are the only, the only Black person in the department or the only gay person in the group or whatever. And there's this phrase I often use called inclusion exhaustion. How it can either be exhausting to be the only and to be oppressed, etc., as you said, or sometimes when somebody is the only, then everybody's coming to the only with questions, well-intentioned questions, absolutely, but still questions, can I say this, or what's the importance of that, or whatever, and then all of a sudden they have to explain hundreds of years of racism to their well-intentioned white colleagues.
I am so glad that you said that. You just entered a topic that I think is so important, that whole idea of making the Black person in the room, the gay person in the room, the Asian person in the room, the expert on racism and anti-oppression, when really it's about you doing your work. You individually being able to do your own work. And sometimes it's a matter of asking, how do you feel when I say that? Having those one-on-one conversations sometimes helps the relationship and helps the individual feel a little bit more like, okay, you're listening to what it is that I'm going through and trying to pay attention to the nuances.
Yeah, and we're not saying white people don't talk to your people of color colleagues, but I think what we're saying is kind of read the room and figure out, use your intuition, what does or doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And you said a second ago, do the work. So how can people today that want to learn, that want to be more cognizant of racism, that want to be anti-racists, what can they do, in your mind, to do the work?
Well, I'm going to flip that. I'm going to ask you, since you're the white guy in the room, right? Yeah. What do you do? Like, I see you wearing this Black Lives Matter shirt,
Thank you.
Right? And that to me is so important. That shouts to me, speaks volumes to me, that here you are, this white man, but you're recognizing this incredible movement that's happening, and you're identifying with it by wearing this shirt on television. Like, what a statement that makes. Tell me why you would decide to do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, diversity is a topic that I'm so passionate about, and being an ally. I'm a white man, so I don't want to say that I have experienced the things that most people of color have experienced, but I want to make sure everybody knows that I'm on this mission to make the world a better place and to help people here in the U.S. understand what racism is all about, how people are still experiencing it today in 2021, and the specific things that they, as white people or people who are supportive of others, can do to be allies, can do to become more aware. And obviously today is our premiere episode, so no better shirt to wear than the Black Lives Matter shirt, which I'm really proud of, and I'm grateful to you for the kind words. And I try to have discussions with people of color so that I can learn and understand, and I also try to seek out feedback and be open to feedback. There was a well-intentioned Facebook post that I made last year after George Floyd was murdered, and my best friend, who is a Black woman, sent me a message and said, the way you worded that is kind of upsetting. And I appreciated that she felt comfortable being direct with me and giving me feedback so that I could edit the post so that it could be received as it was intended to be received, in a positive, supportive way.
Yeah.
So I think, so many of us have a lot to learn, myself included, and I want to be a big part of that learning.
I think that's awesome. And you mentioned a phrase, I want to touch on it. You talked about being a white ally. And I think that's so important, Russ, because that recognition of privilege and the things that you can get away with. Like, do you mind if I bring up the conversation about the police officer?
Oh, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So earlier, Russ and I were talking about an incident where you were on the turnpike, and a police officer stopped you, and you weren't doing anything wrong, but he was trying to redirect traffic or something like that, and you were talking about what you said to him. Can you just,
yeah,
do you remember that?
So, I thought something was wrong with the police officer. I was like, what the heck are you doing? He was like swerving all over the road, and I thought he was driving crazy. And it didn't dawn on me till just now that, oh my God, what if I was a Black man in that situation, and what might have happened? Thank God that nothing bad happened and the situation didn't escalate. But I got chills just now because I just told that story to you 10 minutes ago off camera in the lobby, and here we are now talking about it on air, and you hear all these stories about altercations with people of color and police, and there are countless examples over the years, and you're right. Wow.
Yeah, so being able to recognize that privilege, that you can get away with that, whereas someone who might be of color might not have that level of an open kind of opportunity to just say what you're thinking and say what you're feeling. To be able to recognize that and know that, and be a white ally to Black people, brown people, people who are of color, is such an important statement. And it's a constant evolving kind of thing, because like you said, you told a story you didn't even think about, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think this entire message is really important, and I'm grateful to be here with you, and I'm grateful that you asked me that question about it. And I have so many thoughts on the topic. My mind is swirling. I have my notes here so I don't forget to ask anything.
Yeah.
But what would you say is the most important thing for them to know?
That racism is real. Racism is real. It's not imagined. People aren't thinking that what they're experiencing, people aren't experiencing these things and kind of making it up, that there's microaggressions and there's discrimination, and that this is actually happening in our world. And I was just talking to someone else in the green room, and we were talking about the whole idea of going backwards. That over the last 5 years, I feel like we've wound the clock backwards in so many ways, and it just really illuminates how far we have yet to go. When people deny that there's racism, it's maddening, it's infuriating, and for me, it's just sad.
So people are denying that racism exists?
Every day.
Who?
Do you ever
Where?
watch Fox News?
No, I purposely don't.
Every now and then I tune in just for a few minutes just to get a glimpse of what's going on with the rest of the world, the January 6 people.
Yeah, yeesh.
Yeah, and not to other, but I feel that it's sad sometimes that some people don't accept that racism is a thing. There's your face. There's a gentleman, and I want to get his name right, Ibram Kendi.
Oh, I love him.
Right?
Yes.
He talks about the difference between being anti-racist and being not a racist. And he talks about the importance of really recognizing that being a racist doesn't necessarily mean that you're wearing a cape and a hood. That's not what a racist is. A racist is the person who perpetuates the microaggression or perpetuates, discrimination based on their preconceived notions. I could be a racist, right? If I have specific feelings and perceptions about people who are not of color, right? So you don't have to be in a hood to be a racist. And I think sometimes what we need to be able to do is really recognize that racism is something that is a part of our culture, not necessarily because we hate black people or we hate Asian people or we don't like gay people or whatever. It's a part of our culture because of our history. And there's no way around it. So to really be able to embrace it, I think, is so important.
And the history, slavery, and everything that has happened or not happened since then obviously is something that has a major impact on people of color, I'm guessing, as they try to live their lives, even here in 2021.
Yeah. And it's had an impact, I think, on people who are not of color, too. Because the idea that, I wasn't there. I didn't do that. I wasn't the slave owner. I wasn't the one who raped the slave. I wasn't the one. But to be able to really take responsibility for your part, I think, is so important. Not just for people who are not of color, but people who are of color too.
Yeah. I always say this is an all-in initiative, an all-in mission.
Totally.
It's something for all of us to take action on. And Ibram Kendi, who you mentioned a minute ago, his book is How to Be an Anti-Racist. So not just how to not be racist, but how to be an anti-racist, which is different. What you said about being a white person on this mission, this relates to the all-in initiative or mission that I said a second ago, is that sometimes as a white individual, people feel comfortable, other white people feel comfortable saying things to me because I look like them and I get to hear the true thoughts of people where they wouldn't dare say that to a person of color. So I am right there with you that racism is still happening and discrimination is still happening because I have heard specific things said to me. And in those instances, as you can imagine, I'm taken aback. I can't believe this person just said that. I do appreciate the times where I'm thinking of one person in particular who has asked me a lot of questions about this, and I'm glad that she felt comfortable asking me questions because she was trying to learn. I didn't necessarily agree with her thoughts, but I at least give her points for asking questions and trying to understand. So, for people that are watching today, I want them to feel comfortable, coming to Renai with questions, coming to me with questions. Again, using your intuition to kind of balance, okay, we don't want to create inclusion exhaustion and make people of color the spokespeople and and educators of everyone, but when those moments happen or the doors open slightly, going in the door and asking some questions or being supportive, or after something like the George Floyd murder happens, reaching out and say, I'm thinking of you. Even something as simple as that can be I would imagine, very supportive to a person of color to just hear a simple statement like that.
You know, it's so funny. Two things I want to say. Number one, that is absolutely the truth. Because I remember when the George Floyd murder happened, two of my very good white friends reached out to me and said, quite simply, both of them kind of said the same thing. I don't know what to say. I just want you to know that I love you. And it just gives me chills just thinking about that unconditional kind of support. And then the other thing I was thinking of was when white folks are talking to you and they're saying things that might be a little bit off color, the whole idea of saying to them that makes me feel uncomfortable, or that's not okay, can sometimes shift the narrative and give that person an opportunity to kind of, you know, open up about what it is they're feeling and why.
You know, what I'm trying to do, at least going forward, if somebody, let's say a white person, does say something like that to me, is, you know, what are the reasons that you said that? To try to explore what their thought process is. Because I do want to know what their thought process is, and they may have some life experiences that have led to that point where they make a certain comment. And I'm an optimistic person, as you know, and I'm optimistic that, you know, we will improve this issue. We will eradicate racism with people like us on the job, if you will. You know, that certainly helps. But I'm also optimistic because I feel like many to most in the younger generation are passionate about this. You know, we have more interracial people than ever before, and you know, as Whitney Houston so famously sang, you know, I believe the children are our future. You know,
they are.
And I think each generation that comes along, not every single person in that generation, but many to most, are passionate about this. You know, I look at Gen Z now, and they're very passionate about making the world a better place.
They really are, and I love the work that I do in the sexual assault movement, and I love it because it's filled with so many passionate people who are nonconformists and really have a great approach, and they teach me so much about life. They teach me so much about that word inclusion, because I honestly, Russ, I always thought that I was pretty inclusive. You know, I had a pretty good attitude about people and then it's so interesting because this work in this few months that I've been doing it has really shown me the level of understanding that I have, and I have a lot to learn. I have a long way to go in terms of growth and non-judgment, and you know, a lot to learn, and that's a good thing. And I think that's the point that I'd like to make about everyone on this journey, is that the minute you say, I know enough, I've learned enough, that's when there might be a little bit of an issue, right? Pushing the boundaries toward equity and inclusion, I think, is the key to growth and understanding in this movement.
Oh my gosh, I have three follow-up points on what you said just now. That's how wise it was. So number one, the learning piece. I am of the belief that every organization, every company should have some kind of diversity and anti-racism training. Every time I go into a company and do it, the number one comment in the feedback from the participants is, we want more of this, we wish it was longer, I learned so much, this was fantastic. So if you're in a leadership position at a company and watching this, or management, book somebody, me or somebody else, to come in and do a diversity and anti-racism. Because if you think about it, in the workplace, that's the one collective where everybody is together, and you can teach a bunch of adults in the same place. So that's number one. Number two, you said nonconformists, and the shirt I'll be wearing in episode 2 is my Good Trouble shirt, which I think that's
John
the type.
Lewis.
Yes, that's the type of work that we're talking about, making good trouble. You know, and being passionate about, as you said a second ago, pushing the boundaries, and not in a bad way, but in a way that will move the needle, will reduce and hopefully eliminate the racism that's happening, and will help to increase awareness and will help people learn. You know, I think for both of us, we are passionate about learning.
Absolutely. And one thing, I love everything you said. My doctorate is in organizational leadership education.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Love it. PhD over here. everybody.
EDD, but that's okay. It's the same difference. But I will say that one of the principles that I teach whenever I do any kind of leadership training is there are 5 exemplary leadership practices and principles that I believe that people should apply. Number 1 is model the way. Number 2 is inspire a shared vision. And number 3 is challenge the process.
Yes.
Number 4 is enable others to act. And number 5 is encourage the heart. If you're able to do all 5 of those things as a leader, you will see miraculous things happen on your team. Miraculous. I promise you. Because that challenge the process piece is where a lot of people get stuck. And I think that's what John Lewis and so many others advocate about. Is it's not in a bad way. You're asking questions, you're challenging the narrative. You're saying, okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but maybe we could look at it a different way and try to examine it from this lens and from this perspective, rather than just doing the status quo.
Well, I love the challenge, the process. I feel like that's making good trouble. We have less than a minute left.
Oh,
Time flies. I know.
no.
Time flies when you're having fun and hopefully inspiring people. So final message in our last few seconds here in our premiere episode.
Well, just thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us here on Real Talk on Racism. Russ is a great friend and a great ally, and I'm just so excited about this project.
Me too, and we have so many great episodes for you. Again, sometimes Renai will be here, sometimes I'll be here, but we wanted to be here together to present a united front, a joint mission, that we have so much inspiring content for all of you. I'm grateful to you for being my fellow host here at Real Talk on Racism. Grateful to Nick and everybody behind the scenes here, our amazing executive producer. Thank you for watching. Please keep watching, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.